Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode. Today we will be talking about Sydney, Melbourne and Perth. So the first city I came to in Australia was Sydney, and you might be wondering what were the first impressions. Well, we all know Sydney from the TV mostly, because Australia is a very distant country. We would see Sydney during New Year's on television. And the firecracker show or New Year's show with the opera and the bridge. So this is very vivid, and I've been seeing this for years now. It's one of the first cities to enter the new year, and I always wanted to see it for this reason. And yeah, like eventually I had the chance, which is very exciting. And when I arrived at a hostel in Sydney, and the next day after resting, because I arrived at night, I went out and it was sunny, given that the season below, like south of the equator, is the opposite comparing to countries like Europe, which is north of the equator. So it was hot. It was around probably 28 or 30 degrees Celsius. It was very, it seemed American to me. Big buildings, big streets, and I don't know how to phrase it, but like the infrastructure required cars, and so it's not like you just walk easily from A to B, but it depends also on a car, a bus, or other things. That being said, there's also tram lines, which is good in Sydney, and also bigger trains. I think they were made of aluminium or steel, so it was a shiny outer shell. Also reminded me of my time back in California, where there's a train between San Jose in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. The train, I think it's called BART, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe it was, not sure if BART was like a smaller tram line, but like there's those big trains, and those are using also something like a shiny outer shell. So it really reminded me of my time in California in that sense. And what else can we say? I mean, what you will notice in Sydney, especially in summer, is that when you go to the parks and it's sunny, there's a lot of people chilling in the parks. There's plenty of green parks, which I really liked about Sydney. And when it's hot, people don't lose much time, but they take off their shirts and they just like do sunbathing. And it's surprising to see, because also Australia has a ozone layer hole in its region. This has been known for some years now, meaning that the sunshine exposure it's much higher than in other countries globally. But regardless, the people of Sydney are very fit. This is what you will also notice. There's a lot of bodybuilder types of people, and I hear it from friends that Sydney is also home to the most gyms a city has globally. Let that sink in. So you will see a lot of beach boys, beach girls giving those pumped up kind of hipster vibes also. And yeah, it feels like Hollywood, LA, California, so it's quite comparable in that sense. And like I wouldn't know how to describe it otherwise. And it's nice because people are very active. They go out early and do runs at 5, 6, 7ish. Australians like to wake up early, and they go for runs, and they hit the gyms, and then at the beaches, like when the weather is good, then they like showing what they have. I've an interesting fun fact actually. talking about beaches, there is like what we would call like sandals in Europe, or like Hawaiianas. I mean, some people still understand it in Australia. The sand beach shoes, and they're called thongs in Australia, and thong can be mistaken for something else in Europe. It's usually the string underwear girls would be wearing. And yeah, that's also a term. I think it's a fun fact if you go to Australia and people are throwing with this, that thong term. But like it's really great nature, great beaches of Sydney. I was positively surprised. I didn't expect that the beaches would have nice turquoise colored water sides. But I really enjoyed doing the walks along the coast. Also the famous Bondi to Kogi walk, which stretches along coastline with multiple beaches. It took me, I think, 2 or 3 hours. So it can be easily done in 2.5, I would say. And yeah, what else did I notice? I mean, it's not all just sunshine and gold that you see in Sydney. As I said, it gave me vibes of American cities. Many times you also will see some crazy people on the streets, homeless people, and just people who don't get the adequate medical attention, I would say. You will also see people that are just talking nonsense or yelling around. This is unfortunately something I've witnessed years ago in California. It still hasn't changed, as far as I know from my friends over there. And yeah, be prepared. I mean, it's a very beautiful but big city also. But if you are in a different district, it can have a totally different culture and vibe. So what do I mean by that? There's trams and trains, yes, and the buses, but it might be that you live really in a place where there's no good public transport system in Sydney. Then without a car, you are quite screwed. There's some districts Parramatta and Sydney, where you need from the central station around Town Hall by train, it's 45 minutes or 50 minutes. Parramatta is the opposite side of where the beach is in Sydney, and so that's a long ride, and we're talking about from Parramatta to the city center, and from there to if you want to go to Bondi Beach, the famous beach of Sydney or Australia, we can say, it's another 45 minimum. So you will need 1.5 or 2 hours to go to the beach if you live in Parramatta. So it's a huge, immense city with a wide geographic area. And depending on where you are, your life can be very substantially different. What else can we mention about Sydney? I mean, Sydney is a very iconic city, It's like New York. It's like talking about New York and Manhattan. There is nice old buildings which remind me of Chicago sometimes, because there's tall brick-based buildings I've seen there. And there's also the Harbour Bridge, which is very iconic. I went to the museum of the Harbour Bridge in Sydney. And another fun fact here, the towers made of bricks or stone that you see at the Harbour Bridge, they wouldn't even be necessary actually. They were just put in as decoration. The steel infrastructure of the bridge would be sufficient enough to carry the weight that goes over it. There's a lot of things that makes Sydney great. It's the beaches, the nature around. You can also go to very big forest regions around Parramatta, for instance, as I mentioned earlier. And there's really good, nice parks in the distance, and you don't have to go to the beach always. And together with the iconic bridge or opera house, Sydney is a brand. It will stay a brand. Maybe this is why the city is becoming more and more expensive. It is, as far as I know, the most expensive city in Australia at the moment. You can get a room in a shared house, a single room, usually for 300 or 350 Australian dollars per week at the moment. I had the chance to move into a friend's place. He was sharing it with his friend in Parramatta, and for that single room in the shared house, I would have needed to pay around 330 if I wanted to move in. I decided not to do it because it was so far from everything, as you can imagine now. But yeah, so be prepared. There is a lack of accommodation. It's one of the challenges of the city. And I don't think it's any different from major big cities globally. We have a substantial macroeconomic problem in that sense. But yeah, it's an iconic city. It's a brand. Definitely go see Sydney, check it out. And if you want cheap food or cheap items to buy as gifts, go to Chinatown, which is around Town Hall area. There's also a market which name I don't remember at the moment, but hit me up and I'll find out for you if you want. There's like an underground market around Chinatown, which is very, very interesting to see, and also with affordable prices. I bought myself a nice decorated Sydney mirror that you can, like, it's a circular mirror that fits your hand with a nice print on it, showing the harbour bridge, so like showing the scene of Sydney kinda. And yeah, go check out Sydney. And now you might be wondering, okay, well, what about other cities in Australia? There is Melbourne also. Melbourne is the second most famous city in Australia, I would say, after Sydney. It is around, correct me, it's plus minus 1.5 hours by plane from Sydney, and it is known to be more European, stylish, you know, and like my first impression when I arrived in Melbourne was going there, like from the airport by bus to the city center. There's a lot of modern glass-based buildings, so maybe that's why people compare it to European cities. There's also more, I don't know, like I saw a lot of factories and industry actually, which looked more like a normal average city to me. Sorry guys who are in favor of Melbourne, but this is my opinion. And yeah, but what else? I mean, Melbourne is also very pretty. There is good tramline system. There is a very good tramline system. The trams, they run multiple stops. What do I mean by that? Once I was sitting in the tram going somewhere, and it started counting with like tram stop 30, 31, 32, 33. You see, like, there is many stations, but that's also the risk of it. You know, like the geography of Melbourne is also very huge, very huge. You might need a car, otherwise everything will take a long time. People usually live in districts in those big cities in Australia. And I mean, I'm making an example with Sydney again. My friend who's living in Parramatta in Sydney, he usually doesn't leave his area too much because all of his friends are also in that area. So when I asked him once, like, well, why do you even live here that far from the beach? He said, because all of his friends are there. But going back to Melbourne, Melbourne is also very green, has many parks. The botanical gardens are great, both in Sydney and Melbourne. You have to check them out. I was extremely surprised and thrilled to see them. You should take some time to chill, have a picnic, and just embrace the diversity in plants and also the animals. You can hear different birds. Like let it sink in. What makes Melbourne also great is Melbourne is more of the artistic city with great coffee. This is Melbourne. Melbourne is known for the European style, the many artistic places, museums, and coffee culture, which is not that common in Sydney. So I don't know why that is, but it's what people say, and I think it's also true after what I saw. And in terms of social life, Melbourne is more active at night than Sydney, meaning you can go out at 10, 11 or 12 p.m. and you still find places, different bars or clubs, also very alternative places, playing rock or techno or pop or hip hop. Whereas in Sydney, things sometimes, die out sooner. I don't know, like people, maybe it's because of the gym life, I don't know, but like people sleep earlier in Sydney. I know there were some laws in the past that restricted the service of alcohol after a certain time because there had been some, I don't know if to call them riots in Sydney in the past. There were some trouble areas, so maybe that's the legacy of it now. Melbourne has definitely a better social life at night and also maybe during the day, and but also keep in mind that Melbourne's weather is a little worse, while Sydney is warm and has some changing weather. By that I mean it can be cloudy in 1 hour and the next it can be sunshine again or a mix of it. Melbourne is usually more cloudy and more rainy. Maybe this also makes it European, but maybe this is also why people are friendlier, because they appreciate more each other. Well, what else is there about Melbourne? Well, we said Sydney has great beaches, but Melbourne also has some beaches, but you need to go much further away to find some nice ones. Whereas in Sydney it could take you 45 minutes to come to nice beaches, you will need 1.5 hours in Melbourne. Also, Melbourne's beaches are okay, but they're just okay, you know. If you're a beach person, go to Sydney, definitely. Or even the Gold Coast, which is a surfer's paradise. It's a different city in Australia. If you look at images on Google, you will see it resembles kind of Miami, maybe a mix of Miami and Dubai. Look at the pictures, look at pictures of Melbourne. And if you go to Melbourne, definitely go to museums. There's some free ones. And it's very attractive, I would say. It has its own charm. Also, movie production is more prominent in Melbourne. I have a friend who's involved as a freelancer with movie production, and if you're into those kinds of things, then Melbourne might be your place. So after having talked about these, I was in the process of like figuring out Australia, checking out the cities, their experiences, what they have to offer. And I was curious also about Perth, okay? And the reason is this. I mean, the climate of Melbourne and Sydney, they're different, but also quite the same. Not exactly the same, but yeah, not too far from each other. They're quite changey. Then we have Western Australia, you know, like Melbourne and Sydney are on the east side. And Western Australia, by plane 3-4 hours plus minus, we have Perth in Western Australia. Perth is quite a new city, I'd say. It's being built up in the past 5 to 10 years. It is very isolated, probably one of the most isolated cities globally. It is not too far from Bali. It is yet still like an outsider. And what makes Perth great is maybe the climate. I wanted to see Perth because of the climate. It's usually like sunny without too many clouds. In summer it can be 40 degrees. I know it's a lot to take, but usually the rest of the year it's quite nice. That's for people who are maybe more weather dependent. But I also had my surprises when I went to Perth. I mean, Perth is not as busy as Melbourne or Sydney, which can also be like peaceful, you know, if you're looking for a mid-sized city, which is still like growing. But I didn't know, for instance, that the coast of Western Australia is full of sharks. I learned that a couple days after, surprise, surprise. So usually when they go to the beaches in Perth, they have like special sections where they have nets in the water where you can swim. People are doing it. I would have some doubts still if the nets are intact or not. But that's just me, and everyone was really going into the water. Old, young, people were having a good time. Actually, talking about beaches, like many times I've seen so many Australians turning red at the beaches. I don't know if they were not using sunscreen or just staying too long. I mean, the sun hits intensively. I repeat, the sun hits intensively in Australia. Don't take it as a joke, but really be careful. That being said, statistic here, Australia is, one of 3 Australians develops skin cancer during their lifetime, so be aware. Okay, what else is there to mention about Perth? Well, it's very nice, a city, but peaceful if you're looking for that. Great beaches from the looks of it. There's long stretches of beach around Perth, but Perth has its downsides too. Public transport is terrible for places where I needed to go from A to B by public transport, like train, bus, or whatever. I needed sometimes 1.5 hours, whereas if I grabbed a taxi, it was 20 minutes. You see how many times longer it takes by public transport. It wouldn't even be that terrible. Well, it's terrible on its own actually, but there's more to come. Usually on the buses there were like a lot of crazy people. I'm talking California crazy. It's comparable. I've seen once how a woman was just yelling around every couple seconds in the bus. The whole bus was ignoring it. I've seen how some smaller kids were in an argument and hitting each other. The bus driver didn't give a crap. So that being said, try to avoid the buses. The trains are more in a good condition in Perth, but the bus is terrible. So you better get your own car if you live in Perth. And depending on your area, I try to socialize. This is a challenge in Australia. People will tell you to meet up on weekends because it can take quite a long time to go from A to B, especially without a car. But I think it's also maybe that people are very exhausted. Economy is not the best at the moment. I know some people that have 2 or 3 jobs in Australia. So you see that's not all sunshine, you know. Okay, but Perth has more dry climates. I also went to the garden there, the botanical garden. I tell you, Sydney and Melbourne, they have the best botanical gardens. But I know that if you have a car and go outside of Perth, you have amazing scenery because it's so isolated and the nature around also intact. And this is what people over there appreciate quite much. In terms of rent, Melbourne and Sydney are quite comparable. Sydney a little more expensive, but I would say only by 50 or I don't know, $70, $80 per week. Perth is definitely the most cheap city comparing to those two. And you can stay in a shared house in a room for 200 plus minus. That's really possible. And also what was shocking during my time in Australia is I stayed in many different hostels, and hostel prices are usually on a weekly basis more expensive than renting out a room. So you better have some money if you go to Australia. Alright, what else is there to say? And there's also Alice Springs in the middle of Australia. I haven't been there. It's in the middle of the country, a very hot place, especially in summer. It can be 45 or 50 as far as I know. Then you have Darwin in the very north of the country. at the coast, which gets hit by cyclones and tropical storms during the summer time. So that's a frequent thing. And I hope you enjoyed this episode today. I tried to give you some insights. If you have questions, always ping me and maybe I can talk in the next episodes about it. But for now, thanks for listening. Stay tuned, follow me, and I hope to have you as listeners next time.